We start with a Fox News alert. A rented van plows into a crowd in Toronto, Canada, killing 9 people, injuring more than a dozen. A suspect has been captured by police tonight. Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Police are still looking for a motive behind this deadly attack. Dan Bongino and Mark Stein with us in just a moment. But first we go to reporter Jeff Harrington live for us tonight in Toronto. Jeff?
Okay, so Tucker, the suspect at this point has been identified as 25-year-old Alec Manassian. He is from Richmond Hill, Ontario. That is just north of Toronto. His LinkedIn account says that he is a student at a college here in Toronto. But Tucker, let's talk about that confrontation with police. When police caught up to the alleged suspect, Alec Manassian, it appeared that Manassian may have had a gun pointed at police or a cell phone. That's the other report going around. But of course, it will take some time to get that confirmation. And Tucker, he was even shouting things as, "Shoot me, kill me." So that will certainly now be part of the investigation as to whether there may have been mental health issues at play here. The Canadian government says at this point that 25-year-old Alec Manassian is not associated with any terrorist group. And so as such, there is no national threat here tonight in Toronto and Canada, Tucker.
Jeff, thanks a lot for that. Dan Bongino is a former Secret Service agent and an NYPD officer, and he joins us tonight. Dan, you just heard that the government of Canada saying there is no connection, no obvious connection to a jihadi group, and therefore there's no national threat. How do you assess that?
Well, you know, you never know, Tucker, because you don't know how many of these statements are political and how many of them are based on investigative leads. I mean, it's sad that we even have to think like that.
Right.
But when it comes to incidents like this, there's a reluctance, and I understand. I get it that maybe you don't want to get people, you don't want people to be afraid, whatever it may be. But we shouldn't be letting politics get in the way here. If it does turn out to be a mental health issue, I mean, it's as tragic either way. But you know, he's not connected to a larger terror group, then that's fine. But you know, I don't think being cryptic about it really helps.
Right. But why would that make us less afraid? I mean,
Right.
there seems to be a theme here. Every big city in America, certainly on the coast, is packed with people with mental illness, diagnosed or undiagnosed, living on the street. And crimes, it's not an attack on anybody, an acknowledgement of reality. This kind of thing is increasing. So why are we not treating that like a crisis?
Yeah, we should. And you're right. The intent, I think, from this case is clearly there, regardless. Let's separate two things, Tucker. Intent and motive. Motive's still up in the air. Maybe mental health, maybe terrorism, maybe neither. We don't know that yet. But the intent is clearly there. And two things jump out to me just from the publicly available reporting. Number one of the witnesses at the scene said he hit, quote, every single thing. Now, obviously, if your contact points are people on the curb and you manage to hit just about every single one of them, clearly there's some evidence of intent there. Secondly, there's no evidence there of any screeching brakes, any effort to slow down whatsoever. So we clearly know that there was an intent to harm. And you're right. I mean, this is a big deal. We've seen an uptick in the use of vehicles to kill people in these horrible attacks. And again, being cryptic in the law enforcement arena, I just don't think helps in this new social media era.
So, I mean, attacks using vehicles have been increasing in frequency around the world. And I wonder if there comes a point where even the people in charge of our country admit that limiting access to the weapon, in this case a vehicle, isn't really a rational response. At some point you have to talk about why are people doing these things. Do you think this will spur that conversation finally?
Well, Tucker, I hope so. We have focused way too long on a kind of a fireman approach. In other words, putting out these fires afterwards with ridiculous measures that law-abiding people don't care about. Whether it's, I mean, it's not a gun control debate. I totally understand that, but we've seen it in the gun control arena as well. You have to focus on more of an arsonist approach. In other words, we should be starting investigatory fires here. We should be doing better control at our borders. We should be generating better surveillance capabilities on some of these people. We should develop a better warning system for mental health problems. And instead, you see these kind of, after the fact approaches, and they're just absurd. You've seen it, like I said, in the gun control debate over and over.
Right. It's mindless cable news chatter, focusing on the weapon to the exclusion of the motive. Dan, thank you very much. Great to see you as always.
Yes, sir. Thanks.
Well, as you heard, there's still a lot to assess in the wake of this attack. We don't know the motive for what happened in Toronto, but we don't need to in order to draw larger conclusions, some of them ominous. People didn't used to drive vehicles into crowds. They didn't used to shoot up schools either. Easy availability of weapons did not cause what happened today or what's been happening in this country for years. Fewer people drive than used to. Fewer families have guns at home. That is not the point, no matter what they tell you. The point is that more people want to hurt strangers than ever before for some reason. The bonds that hold society together are obviously fraying. Why is that? You'd think our leaders would be thinking hard about this question, since it's the only question that matters, and staying up late trying to come up with a solution, since that's their job. But they're not doing that. Instead, they're obsessing over trivia, fake Russian collusion, transgender bathrooms, fill in the blanks. They're creating diversions. At the same time, they're seizing the moment, using tragedies like this to strip the rest of us of our rights, rights that our ancestors died for. Some wacko murders innocents. Okay, you're no longer allowed to defend yourself in your own home. That's the lesson we're drawing there. ISIS is recruiting on the internet? Great. A perfect pretext to shut down Twitter accounts we disagree with or demonetize your YouTube channel. Instead of fighting extremism, which is in abundance, the left uses the existence of extremism to shut down legitimate dissent and self-defense. In other words, for the crimes of a few, all of us suffer. Meanwhile, the people in charge become more powerful. That's the scariest part and maybe the whole point. Author and columnist Mark Steyn joins us tonight to break down what exactly is going on. So at some point, do you think the conversation becomes, why would someone want to kill strangers? Why are an increasing number of people wanting to kill strangers? Why aren't we having that conversation?
Because I think the people who run not only Canada, but the entire Western world now, don't want to admit that they no longer have control of the situation.
Yeah.
This part of Toronto, which happens to be my hometown, I was in this neighborhood a couple of weeks ago for a bar mitzvah. All the streets have English names. The school is named after Field Marshal Lord Haig, who commanded British forces during the Great War. They've got streets called Princess and Empress, and there's one named after Lord Byng, who was Governor General of Canada. You can't find anybody with names like that in that neighborhood now. It's become largely Chinese, Korean, there's some Iranians, there's Moroccan Jews. And in this case, it's somebody with an Armenian name. And if you look on a society as just like one big stamp collection, and it's nice to have one of everything, then the modern Western city is a great place. But in these multicultural hot pots, grievances develop, regardless of whether it's a global phenomenon like jihad or whether it's just peculiar mental health issues. And then you have a situation where the jihad guys have got a lot of mileage out of taking trucks, driving them up on the sidewalks, killing large numbers of people. You can't reasonably expect that just to be confined to Muslim jihadists. Sooner or later, some guy like this guy with an Armenian name, and Armenia is like 99.99% Christian, apart from a few Yazidis and Kurds. I think there's like about, last time I was there, I think there were 600 Muslims in the whole joint. But you can't expect, when people see that a car can kill large numbers of people, you can't expect people to say, oh, well, yeah, but that's just a Muslim weapon. That's for the jihad. So eventually, other people start renting cars and driving them up on sidewalks.
So, but if you were running a society, and benefiting from it disproportionately, as our leaders do, wouldn't you spend a little bit of time thinking about how to hold it together? What makes a cohesive, successful society, a society that will, for example, wage a war on its own behalf with a foreign adversary? Like, why wouldn't you think about that? I don't get the sense anybody thinks about that at all.
No, they actually don't. They think in opposite terms. In Canada particularly, you saw last year, in fact, for the Dominion of Canada's 150th birthday, Justin Trudeau celebrated it by awarding $10 million to a jihadist he'd had sprung from Gitmo, who killed an American over in Afghanistan. In other words, multiculturalism lets you decide which side of the war you want to be on, whether you want to be on the home team or the away team. That's how good multiculturalism is. You talked about how they use these incidents to take away our rights.
Yes.
In a certain sense, Tucker, it's actually more It's more basic than that, even. I mean, setting the rights to one side. I notice now when you're in London, when you're in Berlin, when you're in Brussels, when you're in Paris, and now, presumably, when you're in Toronto, they're trying to put bollards over every strip of raised pavement so that cars can't get up onto the sidewalk to kill people. So the price we pay, in effect, for not having bollards around the national border is we've now got to ugly up all our cities and have bollards around everything in sight. On the New York bike path, for example, everywhere you go around any western city now, they're looking uglier and uglier because our leaders have, in a sense, established ugliness as the organizing principle of the multicultural city in the 21st century.
That's right. This is what happens when you put security consultants in charge of hardening the target rather than having enlightened leaders think deeply about what it means to have a happy, cohesive society. But none of them care.
I'd like us to soften the target, and that involves thinking about these issues in a bigger picture sense, not just bollards around everything in sight.
That's exactly right. Mark Stein, thank you. That was deep and interesting. Mark will be back.
Tucker.
Back to react to Kanye West's endorsement of Dilbert cartoonist Scott Adams. One of those interesting developments in the news that nobody could have predicted. Plus, a college professor in Nebraska using her free time and her state-subsidized salary to harass the children of an NRA employee. Why should you and me and every other taxpayer in this country be forced to fund her lifestyle, a job from which she can never be fired? That story and many other questions next. A Fox News alert, President Trump and French President Macron have just departed from Mount Vernon in Virginia. They had dinner together there. Tomorrow, the president is scheduled to hold a joint press conference with his French counterpart, as well as stage a state dinner. We'll continue to follow all of the events of the French president's state visit to Washington. America's public colleges receive hundreds of billions of dollars in government funding. What is that money being used for? Well, in many cases, it's being used to employ radicals whose main job is attacking this country and the rights of normal people who live here. At the University of Nebraska, for example, an English professor called Amanda Gailey took time off to stalk NRA employee Chris Cox to his family home in Alexandria, Virginia, where he lives with his wife and small children. Gailey staged a protest outside of Cox's house. She had a sign that read, quote, "Chris Cox profits off dead kids," outside his house. She also showed up at Cox's wife's business to demand a boycott on the street outside. We reached out to the University of Nebraska. They gave a cowardly and meaningless response, essentially saying, "We don't know anything about that. We don't care. It's not our business." Jason Nichols is professor at the University of Maryland. He joins us tonight. So, Professor, is this okay? Is it okay to decide that because you disagree with someone, you can show up at his house and scream at his wife and kids?
Is it okay to stage a protest? Absolutely.
At someone's home?
I think it's okay
with his kids there.
To protest. Obviously, she was not there for any kind of conflict. He's a member of the NRA. I'm assuming he's armed.
Well, I'm a member. Okay.
I'm assuming she wasn't armed.
Wait, it's not a matter about being armed.
Okay,
I hope that we're not suggesting it's going to get to gunplay.
Absolutely.
I'm asking a philosophical question.
Sure.
Which is, we disagree, for example. Would it be okay for me to give your home address out for our viewers who disagree with you to show up and talk to your kids about how much they disagree with you?
Well, if they want to protest something that they believe that I've
the answer, by the way, is no. That's disgusting.
Yeah. Well, you putting my address out
the whole thing
over
is
the
wrong.
waves. But if you wanted to come directly and stand outside of my house with a sign and look like pretty much a jackass, that would be up to you.
How do you think your family would feel about that? If people with signs attacking you as a kid killer were screaming outside your house with your kids at home, how do you think they'd feel about that?
Again, I don't have many of the details on this.
Well, I do.
I don't know how far of a distance she was away.
Right outside the house, Old Town Alexandria.
She was not on the doorstep. I know that, because then he could call the police.
Look, the principle,
now, if she was
principle
across
here,
the street,
I just want to make sure that I'm hearing this right. You're defending the idea, and again, we're not talking about rights here. She's a legal right to do that. You have a legal right to scream at nuns and to give the finger to elderly women if you want. You can do that. The question is, should you? Is it okay? Is it right? Do normal people, do decent people do that? And do you think it's okay to do this? I think it crosses a really clear line into indefensible behavior,
So if you're
threatening behavior.
so Tucker, if you're asking me, am I going to show up at some right-wing politician's house and stand outside with a sign saying "baby murder"? No, I'm not going to do that. Do I think that person? What I'm talking about is her First Amendment right to protest.
But you're forgetting the left doesn't believe in the First Amendment anymore.
Oh,
that's why
come
YouTube
on.
is demonetizing
ridiculous.
accounts it disagrees with. That's why Twitter kicks people
absurd.
off. Really, it's absurd.
That's absurd.
Look at the polling on it. The majority of college students believe the First Amendment is not absolute and it's less important than preserving the feelings of others. So the left does not believe in the First Amendment anymore. The polling shows it.
I disagree with that. I think, well, at least the people that I know are 100% open to people's rights to protest.
Okay, but that's not the question. It's not a matter. And by the way, there was someone arrested for vandalizing the house. It wasn't this Amanda
And that person
Daly.
deserved to be arrested.
Right. But is this the new precedent? We've gotten to a point where the left has decided the personal is political and vice versa. Therefore, there are no real limits. So, why wouldn't you scream at someone at a restaurant? Why wouldn't you yell at somebody's kids?
Yes, well, I think screaming at somebody at a restaurant, that's not legal. That's not a legal protest.
Well, actually,
that's
it is.
No, that's harassment. That's different. If you are across the street with a sign and you are staging a protest,
but why not?
I've seen it. I've seen protests.
I've seen a lot of protests.
Planned Parenthood.
I'm not against that.
I know you're not against that.
But if you showed up at somebody's house with his kids home, that is a threat. You know where the NRA headquarters is. Everybody does. It's right on Route 66 in Virginia. It's a massive building. You can go there whenever you want. But to find someone's house, can you just say unequivocally it's wrong?
No, I can say that I agree with you that is not the way that I would stage a protest. I believe absolutely they should have gone to the place of business. However,
why should we subsidize this crap? Why should taxpayers, both in the state of Nebraska,
they're not subsidizing her protest.
Of course they are. She gets paid $70,000 a year. She works very little, as you know, because no offense, she's a professor, and so I'm serious. She works. Compare the hours the average person in her position works compared to the average person in most other jobs, and it's a light load.
We're not subsidizing her protest. We're subsidizing whatever it is that she does at the university or college that she works at.
How about this?
Sure.
If this college professor, Amanda Daly from the University of Nebraska, whom again the college in a very cowardly way refused to even comment on, but if she were out staging a protest in favor of the Confederate flag, and she were going up into to the home of a Black Lives Matter member and waving the flag and screaming, would you say that's just freedom of expression and the college should not, get involved?
Again,
as
long as it wasn't a threat. Is she
Can
standing?
you sincerely say that if Milo Yiannopoulos had a teaching position I'm serious.
That would be a problem.
Oh, it would be a problem because you don't agree with them.
No, not because I don't agree with them. Because I don't think
that would be a problem.
Because he doesn't have the qualifications that it takes to teach them.
Oh, the qualifications.
Tucker Carlson,
do you know how many dumb people teach at colleges? Have you been to a college recently? No offense. I mean,
Tucker, if you want to teach at the University of Maryland, I will help get you that position.
That's honestly probably the last thing. I'm not qualified, as you know.
No, I believe you are. You can teach journalism in a sense.
If Milo Yiannopoulos, and I only use his name because I know he's so reviled on the left, but if he got the qualifications, whatever, some bunch of parchment or whatever, and got a job at a college and was leading his protest, you'd be totally cool with that.
If he was leading his protest from the...
Yeah, on college campuses or in his spare time as a college professor.
So one of the things that we found that studies show is that and there was a study of 7,000 college students. It showed that the views of the professor have no effect.
I notice you're not affirming. I just want to note for the record, you're not affirming Milo's right to work at a college subsidized by taxpayers and espouse his views in public.
Tucker Carlson wants to come teach at the University of Maryland.
So good.
I will absolutely support that. You have the right to come.
What an interesting conversation, Professor. Thank you.
Absolutely, always fun. Thank you.
Almost 2 years of searching has produced still no evidence, we're here to tell you, of collusion with Russia during the 2016 campaign. But the DNC has filed a lawsuit over it nonetheless. We'll explain why they did that coming up.
Now in season at IHOP.
Natalia Veselnitskaya is a Russian attorney. And if you recognize the name, that's because in 2016 she became famous for meeting briefly with Donald Trump Jr. You'll remember this was the smoking gun of Russian collusion that you heard about endlessly for months and months on cable news. Well, that one meeting was going to bring down the administration. If you were conducting an investigation into Russian influence in the 2016 election, Veselnitskaya, of course, would be one of the very first people you would talk to, obviously. So how is this for weird? In a recent interview with the Associated Press, Veselnitskaya, the same one, says that she was never even contacted by Special Counsel Robert Mueller. She's done no interviews with any federal investigators. That's what she says. Huh? How can that be? Well, if it's true, it's shocking. But it's only shocking if you still think this investigation is actually about Russian collusion. If it is, then ignoring Veselnitskaya does not make sense. But of course, this investigation isn't really about collusion or Russia, and it never was. It was an attempt to undo election results from day one. We didn't want to think that, didn't want to come to that conclusion, but now it is too obvious to ignore. Joel Payne is former director of African American advertising at Hillary for America, and he joins us tonight. Joel, thanks for coming on.
Good to be with you.
So look, there's a lot we don't know. So I'm taking Veselnitskaya, whom I've never met and know nothing about, at her word that she wasn't contacted by investigators. If that's true, stipulating, if it's true, there's no other explanation other than Mueller isn't really, after more than a year and a half, looking into Russian collusion, because how could you skip her?
Well, if we're going to take this lawyer at her word, we've got to take Bob Mueller at his word and at what he's done, that he has been very responsible with this investigation, and that there's probably a reason why she hasn't been contacted yet. I mean, the investigation's not done. I imagine that if she has something that's material to the case, that they determine is material to the case, that they'll talk to her.
Material to the case? I mean, she is the case, at least as it's been understood publicly. And there have been a ton of leaks from the Mueller investigation, so we know a lot. She met with the president's
do we
son.
like leaks today? Because we don't usually like leaks. Usually we like it.
Well, I'm a journalist, so I actually like leaks.
Okay.
I want
All right,
to know more always,
okay.
but they discredit investigations because investigations, law enforcement is not supposed to leak.
Yeah.
But I always want to know. I mean, my position's never changed on that. But here's the point. Ignoring her isn't possible if what you're trying to discover is whether or not the Russians played a role in the outcome of the 2016 election. So I think we know for certain this investigation, whatever else it is, isn't really about that. We were lied to. It's about something else. So shouldn't we just pause and say, wait a second, what is this?
Tucker, I got to disagree with you. Look, Mueller has even the parts of this case that don't have anything to do with collusion, he's referred to the appropriate jurisdictions, the Southern Court in New York. You know that. Bob Mueller is a man of high regard. He has been lauded by Democrats and Republicans alike for managing this. You don't care about it, but it shows that he has managed this case the way that he should manage it. And let's not lose sight.
You're making it personal. I'm not attacking Mueller. No, just to be clear, I'm not attacking Mueller. I have never once attacked him. I never will attack him unless there's cause to do it. I'm just concerned that the rest of us were sold on the idea that we needed to investigate whether Russia hacked our election, hacked our democracy. The other channels went wall to wall for over a year on that, telling our country we went to war with Russia as a result. We killed hundreds of Russians in Syria as a result. Now it's starting to look like that's not even in play. It's not even relevant. It was never about that. Why shouldn't I feel lied to?
Well, you shouldn't feel lied to because three members of the president's team, three very significant members of the president's campaign team have already acknowledged that they had a role in wrongdoing. They've already either pleaded guilty.
With Russia?
We don't know that. We don't know exactly. We don't know exactly what it is.
Yes, we do because I've read the indictments.
We don't know what the full scope of the investigation.
Okay, but I've read the indictments of those three members. None of whom were really members, whatever. Papadopoulos.
Paul Manafort, Tucker, I've worked on a presidential campaign.
He ran the campaign.
He ran the campaign. That's a significant role.
But Papadopoulos didn't, whatever. But here's the point. None of them pled to anything having to do with Russian collusion. Here's my question to you. If at the end of all of this, assuming it ever does end, we discover that nobody is charged for colluding with Russia, and there's no actual evidence that Russia colluded, won't you have cause to feel lied to?
No, I personally don't. And I know part of what you wanted to talk about here was the DNC lawsuit.
Yeah.
And I'll bring that up in this regard. The DNC is trying to push the discussion, the public dialogue about making sure that we never have a situation like this happen again. We had a foreign government try to compromise the results of our election. We can never allow that to happen. And anybody, regardless of who you voted for, should care about that.
Really? So they care about it. So then why does the DNC push electronic voting? The only way to secure your voting against foreign interference in a foolproof way is with paper ballots. And yet the DNC consistently pushes against that. They don't care at all about foreign interference. This has nothing to do with that. If they really cared, they would be for paper ballots, but they're not. Why aren't they?
Tucker, I disagree with
Wait,
that.
well, how do you disagree?
Pushing
That's
for
like
electronic voting
Yes,
is not
they are.
the issue here.
In every state.
That's not
Early
the issue.
voting. Yes.
You're
What do you mean it's not an
conflating
issue?
apples and
No, I'm
oranges
not.
here.
You're saying I should be concerned about foreign governments
I'm
hacking
saying-
our elections. I'm saying the number one way they do that is electronically. Why don't we have paper ballots? Any security person who's ever looked at this comes to the conclusion paper ballots are the way you protect yourself.
I'm saying if
The
I get
DNC's
mugged
against
on
that.
my walk home, I'm not blaming the fact that there's a light out 2 blocks away. I'm blaming the fact that somebody mugged me, and I want to figure out why they did it, and I want to get to the bottom of it.
But maybe you should stop, to continue your metaphor, stop taping $100 bills to your forehead because it increases the risk. That's my point. If you really are afraid of
We'll agree to
foreigners
disagree
hacking
on
our
the
election,
metaphor.
any security expert. Okay, let me ask you this. Last question.
Okay.
The DNC is taking a position that it ought to be illegal to publish accurate information if that information has been taken from an email account. That would have prevented the Pentagon Papers, not they were taken from an email account, but it was private information published publicly, but it was accurate. Why would the DNC be attacking freedom of the press in this way? There's no other way to read that.
Again, Tucker, you know good and well the DNC is not attacking freedom of the press. The DNC is trying to do what the president has decided not to do, which is get to the bottom of why
so the
our
DNC
election
is
was
not
compromised.
taking the position
That's
that
what
it
it
should
is.
be.
Any other
misreading
take
it.
on it is deflection.
Really? Because the
And-
DNC
and
is
that's
saying,
ignoring the issue.
Well, hold on. The DNC is saying it ought to be illegal to publish these emails. I think that's what they're saying.
The
That's what they said
DNC
they're
is
saying.
saying that in the absence of presidential leadership, we are going to push the issue
Should it be
through another
illegal?
way.
Should it be
And
illegal?
by the way, they've done this before. They did it against Nixon. They've sued to learn information about
But
what happened in presidential
should it
campaigns
have been
before.
illegal, as the DNC suggests, for news organizations
That's
to
not what
publish
the DNC is suggesting.
Oh.
We just disagree on what we read.
Oh, I'm just
from-
taking them at face
from
value. I get maybe metaphorically they're not suggesting that, but literally I think they're saying that.
Tucker, you know good and well that the DNC does not disagree with freedom of the press. You should go take a look
okay.
at.
They're
You
just
should go
calling-
take a look at who's sitting in 1600
They're just calling for
Pennsylvania Avenue
criminalizing it.
and see
Okay,
how
I
he
guess
feels about
I
freedom
was
of the press.
easily misled. Joel, thank you.
Always.
Good to see you. Former U.S. Attorney Joe DeGeneres will weigh in on the DNC lawsuit and a possible prosecution of fired FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe coming up next. Millions and millions of dollars have been spent, taxpayer dollars. Our attention has been focused not on actual matters of state or significance, but on the collusion story that apparently swung the 2016 election. Now we find out that the singular person at the center of that, this Russian lawyer, Veselnitskaya, has never been interviewed, she says, by the independent counsel. How can that be, and what does it tell us about the nature of this investigation? Joe DeGeneres has been watching carefully. He's a former U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia, and he joins us tonight. So I just want to say, I don't have any esoteric information. I don't really know, but she says she has not been interviewed. If that's true, what does that tell us?
It tells us basically that this investigation by Mueller from the beginning has been a fraud. It had nothing to do with collusion by the Russians, and they knew that from the very beginning. Mr. Comey knew that from the very beginning because he knew that there was no basis for any of the FISA warrants, that there were no foreign agents of the Russian government involved in the case from the beginning, and that's why he refused to brief the Gang of Eight on Capitol Hill about the existence of the Russian probe and the dossier for months and months, because he knew if he briefed them, he would have to answer specific questions about the basis for the investigation, and no basis existed.
Just as a procedural matter, but I think it's meaningful, can the FBI director say no to Congress when they say, come tell us about something that we're supposed to be overseeing? Can he just say no?
Well, he kept it from them. They didn't know that the Russian probe, the counterintelligence probe, existed. He kept it from them. Now, if they had asked him, he clearly would have lied about it, because he's lied about it ever since the opportunity arose. He unfortunately was confronted by the existence of the investigation and the failure to disclose it by a congresswoman during the initial investigations into this, when the whole thing blew up.
It's unbelievable. So I would think that both parties, and Democrats think they're going to take control of the government at some point, and they may. They have an interest in having an FBI that they can trust, that we can all trust. So why is nobody on the left calling for charges to be filed against the former deputy director of the FBI, who, according to the IG, lied? Isn't that perjury? Wouldn't that warrant a prosecution?
Well, there's no doubt that McCabe should be prosecuted. Whether or not he will be remains to be seen. I tend to think that it's almost impossible not to. Now that they've charged Michael Flynn with lying,
right,
and George Papadopoulos and all these little people who've done absolutely nothing wrong, there's no way you can't charge Andrew McCabe. remember, he's a senior government official, senior law enforcement official, lied under oath 3 times, according to the Inspector General. No way he can't be charged with lying.
And just stop you there. We can be certain when the IG of the FBI issues its report that we can trust that, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt that Mr. Horowitz has done a credible job. There's no reason to doubt him. In addition, the internal watchdogs of the FBI themselves, their own Office of Professional Responsibility, their ethics watchdogs, said that he lied to them.
So if you have a senior law enforcement official who lied under oath repeatedly about a criminal matter, why would he be defended by liberals? Where are the civil libertarians on the left?
Because the liberals aren't liberals anymore. They're progressives. And remember, it was the progressives who created all the horrible movements in the 1920s and 30s. And those people no longer think. They are reacting. They're against this president. They hate him. There are no principles anymore for them. They believe that everything should be sacrificed for the thrill of having power and doing whatever you want to do to shove down the American people's throat. They have abandoned all pretense of believing in free speech, in believing in accountability, and believe it or not, they have become proponents of the FBI being an organization that lies to the American people.
They've sent hundreds of thousands of dollars to a senior law enforcement official who was fired for lying under oath, and the left is supporting it.
They are absolutely supporting it because they hate this president so much that they are willing to sacrifice the Constitution and any core beliefs that you have as a real liberal.
It's unbelievable. It's really distorting a lot of people. Joe DeGenova, thank you for that perspective.
Thank you.
Milo Yiannopoulos was chased out of a bar by a mob over the weekend. A journalist who was having lunch with him joins us in a minute to tell us what that was like. Stay tuned. You may have mixed feelings about Milo Yiannopoulos, many people do, but if you're on the left, you really hate him. Like, you've never hated anybody for some reason as much as Milo Yiannopoulos. And the effect is Milo Yiannopoulos can't even go to a bar without getting driven out by screaming people. It happened over the weekend. He went to a restaurant in Manhattan, but a crowd associated with the Democratic Socialists of America, most of whom seem like rich kids, gathered around him to chant, quote, "Nazi scum, get out." Watch.
Nazi scum, get out! 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 Nazi scum, get out!
I wonder how many of those Democratic Socialists have their own student loans. Probably none. That would be my guess. Anyway, they claim that the Nazi label is justified because some of Milo's supporters once made a Nazi salute, they say. Now, it's not clear that Milo saw them do it. Whatever. The mob included an editor at The Nation magazine called Annie Shields and also a Gizmodo writer named Brendan O'Connor. So we contacted O'Connor and his editor for a comment, asked him to come on the show tonight. They sent us this statement, which they repeated on the phone. Go F yourselves, because they're writers. Chadwick Moore is a New York journalist. He was with Milo at that bar, and he joins us tonight. So here's the amazing thing to me. This took place, am I getting any of this wrong? This was a restaurant called Churchill's, named after Winston Churchill. It's on Park Avenue in New York. It has $16 salmon appetizers, and this was the venue that the socialists chose to meet at, a restaurant named after Churchill on Park Avenue.
And you notice all of the nationalistic British flags hanging around. I believe they must have come for the craft beer, is what I decided. You know how the socialists love their $8 craft beers. That's the only thing I can come up with. Surely we thought this place would be safe. We made reservations. We just wanted a simple Sunday roast. We were looking forward to this. He's British. He probably hasn't had a good roast in a very long time. And we encountered, and of all the gin joints in the world, we had to walk into the one where the socialists were meeting.
So they started screaming at you and calling you names, and what happened?
Well, we had stepped outside for a moment, and on our way back into our table, they were shouting. They would not let us go back to our table. We figured we left our bags at our table, so we were going to see if they calmed down. If they didn't, we were just going to get our bags and leave out of respect for the staff and the other customers. Other customers, you can see in some of those videos, were scared, and they were actually running out with their children. So when we tried to go back to our table, They gathered around him and would not let us go back to our table. And then a very large, I think it was a woman, it looked like a woman-ish, shoved Milo. And that is when we realized that this was going to get very violent. It was just the two of us. And we asked the staff if they would please retrieve our bags, and they did very politely. And Milo just said, I was a very big Trump supporter in the last election, and that's what this was about. And the waitress was very confused and said, okay. Clearly none of the staff or other patrons really knew what was going on or understood this reaction. We were just two guys trying to have some lunch, trying to have a roast.
Boy, those Vassar grads are dangerous when they get mad. Did you know that they were going to be, that it was the meeting of the Trustafarians was in progress when you chose this restaurant?
Absolutely not. I didn't even know they knew where Park Avenue was. Well, their parents do, certainly. But absolutely not. We made reservations several days in advance. We just wanted an English roast, and this place had come very highly recommended. That was the end of it. I see on Twitter they're trying, because the optics of this are so terrible, and they know how awful they look, that I see on Twitter that they're trying to say that we had planned this. I see certified salon reporters with their blue check marks saying that Milo had brought his husband out, who everyone knows that Milo is married to a black guy. I don't know if they think I'm a Sean King or what, but so they keep trying to say we did this on purpose. No, we really wanted to have a peaceful lunch.
Here's one of the revolutionaries. This is Brendan O'Connor. He works at Gizmodo. This is the kid we wanted to have on tonight. I don't know if oh, there he is right there. And he's obviously acting on behalf of the global proletariat. This is the kid who says he was a journalist, but who was there sort of on behalf of the socialists. We checked, needless to say, from one of the richest suburbs of New Jersey, went to some $50,000 a year boarding school, apparently. Was he one of the people screaming at you?
Yeah, he marched outside and tried to doorstep Milo. He shoved a recorder in his face and started asking questions about, 8-month-old news stories that involved him and other things that had been debunked. And Milo was just very polite and had said, "I'm here with my friend. If you want to interview me, please send an email to me and we'll set something up." He would not drop it. He didn't know what he was talking about. He was clearly nervous and fumbling and had no idea what to ask Milo. Finally, Milo just said, "Leave me alone. I'm here with my friend. Get your facts straight. I will gladly give you a proper interview." And then we have, of course, this Nation editor who admitted on Twitter she runs the Nation's Twitter handle, and she has
another
been
worker.
Another worker.
So great.
Well, it's important to know. I don't have to tell you this, but they were all white. Obviously, I don't have to tell you this.
Shields.
All 20 of them. Yes. So she has been going on a storm on Twitter. Standing up for the working class and the people, and all of those precious black people.
There was
that
a
she's
time
defending.
when socialists cared about economics and had an actual case to make. I don't agree with it, but I mean, they had a kind of reasoned, thought-out case.
Yes.
That was fundamentally an economic case, and then little rich kids like this got involved, and it became all about race and gender, like everything is. Anyway, Chadwick,
Exactly.
thanks for joining us tonight. I appreciate it. We've invited this Brendan O'Connor kid on, by the way, and we'll hope he'll come on from Gizmodo, and hopefully he'll come on tomorrow night and explain what he was doing at Churchill's scene of the revolution. Up next, rapper Kanye West has come out as a fan of Dilbert creator Scott Adams because the world is not weird enough. And the left, of course, is mad about this. We'll explain what happened and why with Mark Stein next.